Thank you. Thank you very much, Rector, Professor, Professors, students. Thank you very much for this very warm welcome. I would like to, first of all, apologize with the Australian ambassador. Next time we'll make a joint event. And I would like to thank you for two big reasons. The first one is obviously for the invitation. And this is one of well, not really the last commitments I have in my current capacity, because this coming 3 weeks, exactly 3 weeks, are still full of commitments, things to do, and things happen in the world until the very last day of the mandate. The difference between my job and others is that the war doesn't stop according to the transition time of the European Union institutions. But I'm very happy that we managed to do this still in this capacity after having tried so hard in these last years fighting with what you correctly described as an horrific agenda. But also I would like to thank you for the opportunity you give me to move to a more normal life, explore the possibility that I wanted to explore when I had your age, of doing some academic studies and researches on what has always been my passion, the state of the world and security and defense and foreign policy issues, and also of taking the luxury of doing something that the academic world often does. You will forgive me if I used a verse of a song by a very well-known Italian singer that might not be translated in English, De André, that in a wonderful song said, it's much easier to give good advices when you cannot give bad examples anymore. So I will be in that privileged position of not only sharing experience, but also giving some of those advices that in this position I cannot really afford to give. I am really looking forward, as you said, this new opportunity, and then I'll move to the issue of today. Also because in these 5 years in this job, I've always enjoyed enormously every opportunity I had to discuss with students, with young people in general. Has always been very refreshing for me, has always been an opportunity not only to receive questions, but also to ask questions about how you see the world, how you see diplomacy, how you see the current challenges and the current opportunities that the world offers to us. And I've always found this extremely valuable opportunity to change the perspective and see things of our job in the institutions that sometimes are not perceived in the system. And that with a fresh look that you can bring, and I'll come back maybe at the end of my speech, offer very precious different perspective that is useful also in the institutional work. And then I enjoyed it. So I'm very much looking forward to the next phase of my life and being very happy of doing that with you. These 3 years, 5 years have been quite hectic, to use a euphemism. But what we have tried to do, including with the global strategy and in the daily work, has always been to try to put things into perspective and go a little bit beyond the day-to-day work. So looking back at these 5 years, I will try today to identify a few key elements that have guided this work beyond the hundreds, if not thousands, of single issues we dealt with every single day and still today. Think of Syria. Most of them extremely important by themselves, but the risk of this job, I found that very easily, was to jump from one crisis to the other without giving a sense of what the mission beyond the emergency issues could have been. So let me highlight 3 key issues, and then I'll be very happy to use your questions to cover other issues that for sure are important but you can't squeeze 5 years of work in just a few minutes. So let me identify 3 elements that for me have been a little bit the fil rouge of this work. And if I look backwards, I would say these are the 3 things we have done in this 5 years with good results, even if you can always do better, among the many others that could be added. First, we've taken the biggest step forward towards a European Union of security and defense, after, I would say, almost 70 years of failed attempts. Second, we have built the external dimension of probably the first ever European Union migration policy. And third, we have protected multilateralism. Having to say that in the first years of the mandate, we didn't perceive that this would have been that complicated and challenging task, and not even so much needed, because at the beginning of the mandate, multilateralism was quite safe. In the most recent 2 or 3 years, we have seen the most coherent attempt to dismantle it since World War II. And so the European Union took on its shoulders, I think big enough, the responsibility to protect and preserve and also build the multilateral system in a complicated environment. First, the European Union defense. When European integration moved its first steps in the 1950s, our founding fathers, and allow me to say also mothers, because there were a few, not many, but a few, they understood very well that Europe would only be irreversibly peaceful and also globally respected with a common defense. Then they tried to create a European community of defense. They failed, but their intuition is still valid today in very different circumstances. The logic of power and even of geopolitics of the 50s is definitely different from the one we live in today. But that intuition is still valid in this completely, radically different circumstances. European defense is, first of all, about our capacity to take foreign policy decisions autonomously, the so-called strategic autonomy you might be studying in some courses. This means, to me, that the European Union should be able to take full responsibility of our own security, something we have never managed to do in history as Europeans, if not one against the other, and that doesn't really count as taking care of our collective security, on the contrary. Europe in today's world must, and I underline must, be militarily capable of acting autonomously if and when this is necessary. Autonomously doesn't mean unilaterally, on the contrary. All our military and civilian missions have either been requested by their host countries or mandated by the United Nations. And this is actually a way of strengthening the multilateral system through our European Union action. And in these years, we've made our military cooperation with our partners, starting from the UN system, but also NATO, closer than ever. And this is what I call cooperative autonomy. This concept is not just about defense. The strategic autonomy of our foreign policy also depends, for instance, on other tools and using the power we have in a more effective way. Think of the possibility we have of developing the strength and independence of the euro as a currency, which would allow us to take decisions, and not only economic ones, in full independence in the world of today. This, I believe, will be one of the most interesting frontiers for our economic and foreign policy in the coming years, strengthening the international role, the global role of the euro as an independent currency in the financial system in the world. Yet, military means are still essential, first and foremost, to shaping a global security environment that is conducive to peace and security also in Europe. I believe we have all understood in these last years that our security as European citizens depends enormously on peace and security outside our borders. We have lived 60 years building peace inside the European Union, and I think in this last 5-10 years we've realized that that was not enough. That if the rest of the region, if the rest of the world is at war or in conflict, this has a repercussion on us as well, in economic terms, on security terms, in political terms. So I believe that if we care about peace and security inside Europe, and I wonder who doesn't, we must deal with peace and security abroad. And the only way to do so effectively is together as Europeans and also together with our partners. But together as Europeans first and foremost, because I know there is often this understanding that Europe doesn't have one common foreign and security policy because we have 28 member states that have their own national policies. And this is true. I've been a minister myself, and I know that the European policy doesn't substitute and shouldn't substitute the national policy. But today, no European state can be a global security provider alone. No one of them, not even the bigger ones. And we were recalling a quote that might resonate familiar to you. In the world of today, there are not big and small member states. There are only member states that are small and have not yet realized they are small. This is the security situation of the world today. So, alone, each of us is too small. But together, we are a global security provider. Just imagine that the defense spending of the European Union altogether is the second after the US. Far before the Chinese investments, far before the Russian investment. The point is, it's fragmented. So, on top of this, the cost of not having a European defense is high in economic terms. The European defense industry is one of the biggest and best technologically in the world, but investment coming from national governments so far has always been fragmented. It has suffered from duplications, and it has failed to create economies of scale, which is the point of strength of the European Union as a concept. In short, the Europe of defense is essential for political reasons, for security reasons, and for economic reasons. So when I started this work 5 years ago, I tried to focus on this, and I wanted us to move beyond the theological, if you allow me, debate. I have nothing against theological debates, but in this case, when you talk about defense, you'd better be practical. I tried to move beyond the theological debates of the past, for instance, on whether we should have a European army or not, or whether strengthening a European defense would have weakened the alliance, the North Atlantic Alliance. I rather focus on what we could do in practice, here and now, step by step, and on creating the right political conditions inside the European Union, across the different institutions, the Council, the Commission, also the Parliament, to overcome the skepticism that had always characterized the debate on European defense and build consensus. Because if you start from the assumption that consensus is something you find in nature, you stop doing anything before even you start thinking of it. Consensus is not something you find, it's something you build. And by doing so, we achieved in these last 3 years, in particular after the global strategy was adopted, more progress than ever on European defense. We created incentives for member states to invest together. Thanks to this, they are now investing resources in a smarter way, avoiding duplications, developing the high-tech capabilities that are essential for our security in this century. If you think of cyber defense or artificial intelligence, just a few examples of how the European technology can be useful for the security sector. But we also created something that was completely unimaginable just a couple of years ago, the first unified command center for our European military missions, something that, again, everybody would have told you impossible to even imagine. When I started this mandate, everyone told me, you will never make it, don't touch it, it's a lost case, the European defense has always failed before, it is simply impossible, forget it. And yet we made it, and that was thanks to an excellent teamwork and dedication of many in the European institutions, in all the 28 capitals, and I underline the 28, that includes all the 28. And today, it still does, today we have the tools to invest together, research together, train our militaries together, and act together when necessary. And let me tell you that, seen from the outside, this is the privilege I've had in these 5 years, seeing the European Union not from the inside only, but from the outside, through the eyes of our partners. The world needs, really, the European Union to be a global security provider, exactly because our way to approach security issues is a different one. We have a sort of trademark, if you allow me, the European way to peace and security. When we act, it is never to fight a war. I believe it is because we have had too many wars in our history. And we know that in a war there is no winner, there are only losers. So we only use military force as the European Union to prevent a war, to stabilize a country after a conflict, or to train security forces of partners that are facing very serious challenges. One of the things I'm most proud of, for instance, is Operation Sophia, the military operation that we launched in the Mediterranean to dismantle the business model of human smugglers. We have used, in that case, our military power. I think we went up to 24, 25 member states with the men and women in uniform acting under the European flag, to save tens of thousands of lives, not only at sea, where it was most evident, but also in the desert and inside Libya, because dismantling the criminal networks that make money on migrants' lives means also protecting those you save at sea, but also those that have not yet embarked on a boat and are victims of these criminal networks. And here I come to my second point, migration. One thing that really was striking for me, maybe because I was coming from the Italian experience, maybe because the day after, I was thinking of that yesterday as I was following the hearing of my successor, of Josep Borrell, that did wonderfully well, I think. When I did the hearing 5 years ago, the day before, or 2 days before, I was coming straight from Lampedusa. And I remember very well meeting the people of Lampedusa, but also meeting the NGOs and the migrants there back then, in 2014. I promised them that I would have tried to bring that cause into the European institutions. And when I arrived here, I found out with a lot of surprise that the point was simply not a European issue and was definitely not a foreign policy issue, foreign affairs issue. When I started my mandate, thousands of people were dying in the Mediterranean Sea, and there was simply no common European response to that. It was left to the member states to deal with it. On some issues, it is still the case, and I believe this is going to be one of the next challenges to be faced. But migration was not even on the agenda of the European Union foreign ministers' meetings, something that truly shocked me, because migrants are not coming from Mars. And even if it was Mars, it's still space, and so it's still foreign policy. So first thing, we put the issue on the European agenda. Then we launched Operation Sophia in just 2 months. And this is a demonstration that the European Union can act fast when it wants to. Building a military operation in 2 months, any one of you that has any background in defense studies know that even from a national point of view might be challenging. We did it, and it showed us that it was only a matter of political will. When everybody wants to do something, then the European Union can be fast. Operation Sophia was part of our response to an emergency, the tragedy of deaths at sea. We had a moral duty to act, I believe, and we did that. Immediately afterwards, we then started to work to stop the deaths that were happening inside Libya's territorial waters, where we couldn't intervene. We did this by training the Libyan Coast Guard with a strong focus on the respect of human rights and international maritime law. Not the easiest thing to do, as you can imagine, but still, I believe, a partially successful story. Then we set up an unprecedented form of cooperation with the United Nations and the African Union to tackle the tragic situation of the detention centers inside Libya. Thanks to this work, and I remember very well, at that time, the UN agencies were not operating inside Libya. Neither the IOM or the UNHCR were present inside Libya. Thanks to our common work, they moved in. We managed to evacuate 50,000 people from the centers, giving to almost each of them the possibility to start a new life, either in their home countries if they had voluntary returns, or in a safer place if they were entitled to asylum. And then, again, another step going to the roots of the problem. We started to train the security forces, again, how the military can act for human rights. Training the security forces of countries in the Sahel, that was the main entry route to Libya, to prevent so many people from dying in the desert, because that was a huge tragedy, still is, much less, even if it happens far from the media spotlight. But migration cannot be tackled as an emergency, and that is, I hope, pretty clear today. It needs a long-term approach, one that understands the reasons why. This is the main question. Why does a mother risk her life and the life of the children? Why? You're too young to have kids, but if you have kids, before risking their lives, you have to consider twice, why are you doing this? And if the motivation of risking your children's life is stronger than the fear, it means we've missed something. So we have launched in these years the largest ever and more detailed ever investment plan for Africa. Somebody asked for a Marshall Plan for Africa. We have it already. It's about, 2 billion euros every year that the European Union invests in Africa, in many different sectors. but most importantly, with a strong focus at targeted measures discussed locally with not only civil and political authorities and institutions, but also the civil society, the people, the communities, trying to understand why, for instance, from one community, there's a lot of people living, and 10 kilometers away, there's no one living. So having a targeted approach and developing opportunities. Let me tell you, I am proud of this work, even if I know it's still not enough, even if I know every single life that is lost, as it happened just a few days ago in Lampedusa, is one too much. But I think that if I look back where we were 5 years ago and what we have managed to put in place on the external side of our migration policies today, I am proud. There are things that don't make me proud, make me quite ashamed, but I'll come to that at another moment. I think in these years we've put together an effective external migration policy of the European Union. I believe that we've managed to do so because and when we've managed to work together as Europeans and with our partners, countries of origin and transit in Africa and Asia, African Union, the United Nations and its agencies, and moving from a confrontational approach, we the receiving end against you the sending end, from that logic to a partnership approach. We have a common challenge, it's not going to disappear, let's sit around the table and let's find a way of sustaining the difficult challenge of managing a phenomenon that is not going to disappear. I always say that foreign policy is about interests and values. At the same time, this was a controversial point of the global strategy. I believe we have an interest in finding a sustainable approach to migration, but this is also about our core European values. And first of all, the respect of each and every human life. I always felt a lot of frustration when people are referred to as numbers. They have names, they have histories, they're parents and friends and children and their life. The same about value is true for our work on multilateralism, and I come to an end. Sorry, it's been long, but maybe we can take some 5-10 minutes more. The idea of cooperative global governance is a core European value. It is our history, it is part of who we are, it's our DNA. We started as a multilateral project, and today we are the most successful multilateral experiment ever in history, and maybe this is part of the reason why some don't like us so much, because we are the living proof that it works. European nations fought against one another for hundreds, thousands of years. And then finally, after the greatest catastrophe in human history, where we not only killed each other, but we also dragged the others in our own wars, we realized that it was much more convenient for us to address our disagreements in a different way. At the end of the day, I don't want to sound cynical, but I think the European Union was born out of convenience. And at the end of the day, it started with something very, not too idealistic like steel and, It was more convenient for us to make peace than making war. That's the point, starting from an economic perspective. And I think this lesson is still very useful and valid in today's world. The same applies to world politics. To me, multilateralism is first and foremost, obviously, a matter of values. It is the best way we know to give a voice to all on our planet, to all nations, to all people, and ensure that decisions are taken in the most democratic, transparent, and inclusive manner. This has a value. But at the same time, I believe multilateralism is very much about interests and our interests. It is the best way, it is out of experience, I can tell you, sometimes it's the only way we have to build sustainable solutions to the conflicts or the crises or the challenges of our times. Because unless you put around the table and you make agree all the relevant interlocutors that need not only to agree and sign a piece of paper that says peace, but also those that are on the ground and need to implement it day by day, any piece of paper will value nothing if you don't have that multilateral approach that keeps everybody together. So multilateralism is not a nice ideal. It's about security. It is about creating the conditions for our economies to prosper. It's about trade. It's about avoiding war through mediation and dialogue. It's about respect. And yet, in these years, we have witnessed, as I was saying, the greatest attack against multilateralism since World War II. We, as European Union, have tried our best, and in some cases, in most cases, it has been still enough, has been very difficult, to preserve the multilateral system in this extremely difficult circumstances. We have worked to preserve, for instance, the nuclear deal with Iran, extremely difficult, but still in place. The Paris Agreement against climate change. We have saved UN agencies from collapsing, literally. Think of the UN Agency for the Palestinian refugees. And here it's not only a matter that counts for millions of refugees, Palestinian refugees, it's also a matter that counts to preserve the two-state solution. And at the same time, we have tried to build new multilateral solutions to the great challenges of our times. We have created an international contact group to try to help find a peaceful and democratic solution to the crisis in Venezuela. We have brought together all the different regional powers to accompany peace processes in places where normally regional powers don't find it easy to cooperate. I think of Afghanistan or Syria. We have worked like never before with other regional organizations, for instance, with the African Union, to support peace, security, development, opportunities in Africa, but also with other regional organizations. I think of ASEAN, I think of the G5 Sahel, I think of Mercosur, I think of the Pacific Alliance, and the list could continue. We have invested in building strong partners because we have realized that having strong partners around us was not a threat, but it was a point of strength. On one hand, we have always tried to bring together at the same table players that have diverging interests and views, and that is legitimate. You cannot ignore it, but you have to handle this, because this is the only way to end a crisis. But at the same time, we have invested in creating a strong network of friendships and partnerships with those that share our interests and values. A lesson I've learned in these years is to dedicate time and energy not only to problems that obviously naturally attract your interest, but also to building stronger friendships all around the world, investing energy and political capital in those relationships that seem easy before they turn difficult, because it could happen, and making your friends and partners stronger. Because, as rightly Borrell said yesterday in his hearing, you cannot be a multilateralist alone. You need to invest in the strength of your partners to make your agenda stronger. So, for instance, when a country goes from authoritarian rule to democracy, or when a peace deal is signed, it is essential to support that change, sustain it, and make it grow over time. And only the European Union, among the global players, has this long-term consistency, also thanks to our long-term financial frameworks that allow us to accompany processes for a long time. Very often, our best interest is to invest in the good stories, to invest in friendships, both old and new. And in these years, this has made the European Union a point of reference all across the world. Our friends know that they can rely on us. Those who work for positive change know that they can count on our support. Europe today, I believe, is an indispensable partner for all those that are working towards a more cooperative and non-confrontational global order. So I don't think I exaggerate if I say that the world counts on us. Our partners rely on us. And I have the impression that this happens much more than we realize inside the European Union. If you see the world from the outside, if you see the European Union from the outside, some of you do, you probably see someone on which you can rely. With its own problems are part of life. But I have always had the impression in these 5 years that Europeans were less aware of our strength than our partners in the world. So in these years, I think I have seen that the European Union can live up to this role, but to do so, it has to continue on the path of greater unity, consistency, and integration. And it has to continue its global engagement and commitment. And for this, and I finish here, it needs you. It needs you because I believe it needs a new generation that understands, first of all, the world, the new world. Second, Europe's potential role in it, that sees our collective potential and works to fulfill it with enough courage not to stop when people tell you you can't do it because it has never been done before. I think we are now facing the need for a generation of Europeans, and I mean Europeans at large, that sees the need for Europe and makes the dream of a truly united Europe a reality. So I think that for once you have a chance of having a generation of Europeans that has something not only to learn but also to teach. Thank you.